99% likely to be true, get on with your life, right? Just accept that as true and don't keep trying to come up with evidence for it against it unless it's forced itself on you. Like when people say that the universe is not really expanding. In my field, I get this, right? Like we've had evidence since the 1920s the universe is expanding.
Well, who says it's not?
Everyone who emails me every week like this, I get emails and letters, and they have their own theories, and the light just got tired coming from these other galaxies and so forth.
Light gets tired?
There's literally something called the tired light theory.
Light fatigue?
Yes. There's literally like this.
Light gets tired?
like this. There's literally.
There is no expansion in this universe. Here, we have a full account of the cosmological redshift. This is the equation representing Hubble's law. If you recall, Hubble's law is the distance proportional redshift in cosmological bodies. The redshift is consistent enough for us to determine the emitting body's distance, which is typically represented by approximately 70 kilometers per second per megaparsec. This equation is the gravitational redshift equation, with a density that is scale variant. To my knowledge, this is the only way to predict Hubble's law using fundamental parameters. It is remarkably accurate. Each one of these rings right here represents a specific scale. The universe has an infinite number of scales. The density of each scale is inversely proportional to the radius. The smallest scales have the highest density, the largest scales have the lowest densities. Due to gravitational redshift, the frequency of light decreases as it travels across the universe. The resulting observable radius is approximately 4,200 megaparsecs in length. Each individual scale can be viewed as a cloud of dust with a homogeneous distribution of mass. The collapse time for such a cloud increases with the radius. I believe this is the only logic necessary to prevent the universe from collapsing. As further evidence, we can use the Unruh effect equation to predict the temperature of the cosmic microwave background radiation. With this equation, we find a temperature of 3 degrees Kelvin between the observable radius and the Schwarzschild radius for that same amount of mass. With a full account of Hubble's law, we can come to only one conclusion. The universe is not expanding. Now, publishers don't want anything to do with something like this.
With 59 possible redshift mechanisms.
However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120. That is 1 with 120 zeros after it.
I'd like to read this quote by Geoffrey Burbidge because it's relevant to this topic. He said that underlying all of the topics in the extragalactic universe are two basic beliefs which are widely held today. One is that evidence strongly suggests that the hot Big Bang cosmological model is generally correct.
10 to the 120.
And two, redshifts of all objects outside our galaxy are cosmological in origin. He goes on to say then, in my view, the general acceptance of these ideas and the subsequent edifice of models which has been erected around these ideas is a fundamental mistake. The direction that research will take in the 21st century, however, may well lead to a compounding of the mistake. And I predict no immediate return to reality. So this really revolves around our interpretation of what redshift really means. The Hubble Space Telescope is being used in recent times to peer into the distant cosmos, and we see pictures like this one.
But there were airborne telescope observatories being flown longer than Hubble. And it actually began with balloons, because there's a satellite identical to Hubble, about 2/3 the size, that was launched from Antarctica on a balloon. There's a photo of that on the U.S. Antarctic website. Sophia can do matter of fact, the telescope on Sophia is identical to Hubble. Everything that Hubble can do, Sophia can do. It literally has captured the same photos as Hubble, and that's how I was able to do the comparison. As a matter of fact, some of the pictures that Sophia captured were actually at a higher resolution and more clear than Hubble.
Of the Hubble Deep Field, a 153-hour exposure of thousands of galaxies that are some of the most remote galaxies in the universe.
And Peratt studied plasma formations in the laboratory for many years. And what he did was create what are called particle and cell animations on supercomputers. Galaxies are, rather than being condensations of gas and dust that are gravitationally bound together, were actually plasma formations. And he thought that these simulations showed that cosmic plasma is confined due to self-consistent magnetic fields. And these magnetic fields are induced by currents that are flowing through the plasma, creating filamentary structures. And a cross-section through these filamentary structures indicated the formation of several galaxy configurations. And among those configurations were elliptical and barred spiral shapes. So Peratt insisted that plasma, along with electricity, engenders the structures in the universe. And since galaxies are often strung like pearls through space, or like beads on a string, that galactic arrangement lends credence to that idea.
These galaxies would then have very high redshifts, and from that they interpret, according to the Hubble law, that they must be the most distant galaxies in our universe. But what do astronomers actually measure? Let's have a look at this. Obviously light. They have light of various wavelengths that they use their telescopes and image these objects like the Hubble Deep Field. They measure the brightness or the intensity of these light sources, and they therefore interpret that the brighter the object, the closer it is. This is like the inverse square law of illumination. So they make the inference that their brightness is some measure of distance in the universe, which is fair enough, because this is something that we know, something in physics that we practice. But of course, if you are to make a quantitative measurement in the universe, you would have to have a standard bright source that you know is calibrated, and you observe this at different distances. But that's like a tautology though, because you're using brightness as a measure of distance. So you've got to be really careful there about measuring distance in the universe. But the key measure of distance nowadays is redshift. Well, what is redshift then? We need to understand it. When light is split by a prism, as shown here, into the different colors of the rainbow, we see the various wavelengths that light is split into, and if we put this on a spectrograph, we can spread it out and observe various lines, spectral lines. Here I show nitrogen gas, which has all these different absorption lines in it, but you get both absorption and emission lines. In fact, it's quite interesting to note that the gas helium was first identified in our sun before it was ever discovered on Earth, and it was identified through spectroscopy. So the gases in the surface of stars have various elements that are ionized.
Our atmosphere is a giant density gradient. It is filled with many different chemicals. The troposphere contains a lot of water. Humidity can be 30 to 70%. The lower atmosphere is mostly nitrogen and oxygen. It also includes argon, helium, hydrogen, methane, and many other chemicals. There is other levels of the atmosphere, unfortunately off limits to citizens. The highest unmanned balloon a citizen has launched into the sky was 53 kilometers. Because of buoyancy, helium and hydrogen rise. Therefore, there is a tremendous amount of those elements in the stratosphere. There is the ozone layer filled with O3, oxygen, and there is the magnetosphere. The magnetosphere can ionize the air, and obviously a magnet can have a profound effect on light. This effect is called the Faraday effect. It's where the polarization of light is rotated while it travels through transparent materials. There are many lab experiments to show electromagnetic effects on light. Also, this is a field that requires a lot more study. Some scientists say that magnets don't affect light, but consider that light is moving at extreme speeds. So a single magnet may not be too noticeable. However, a giant magnetic field such as the Earth's field can certainly affect light. As you can see, buoyancy absolutely must separate the elements of greater densities. This means that NASA is clearly not telling us the truth about the elements contained in the stratosphere, and they are probably not telling the truth about the air pressure there either. When hydrogen and helium rise, they obviously do not disappear. No, they settle at the top and they stay there. It is almost unbelievable to say that nitrogen is the most common element in the sky when there is so much helium and hydrogen rising. Not to mention other combinations thereof. Take a look at our buoyancy diagram. This is what we call a density gradient. The cutoff lines are actually pretty clear. Let's take a look at a density gradient in a laboratory. Here we can see that the light is bent downwards and then it is bent upwards. In fact, they even split the beam of light and recombine it later. Pretty amazing, right? Still not convinced? Take a look at this clip from the North Pole sun mirage. They see the sun during a time of the year where it should have been impossible. It may be due to the magnetic pole or some other refractive phenomenon. Let's take a look at this site here. They sort some elements by their refractive index. Notice that there are still tons of materials not on this list, and they do state that the numbers need to be verified, but this is a great reference. So we can see that hydrogen is 4 times more refractive than helium, and lucky for us, hydrogen is more buoyant. So for the 300 or more miles of atmosphere, depending on how high you guess the sun to be, light will travel significant distances bent upwards towards the observer. Extreme heat or cold from the sun can certainly forge elements, such as helium hydride or even stranger elements. It's fair to say, unless parts of space reach -300 degrees, we will probably not see liquid hydrogen. However, on the internet, people seem to say in some cases atmosphere is extremely cold. It creates an inversion layer, supposedly. Maybe it just depends on where the sun is. It has been estimated that there is helium hydride in the stratosphere, however. Now, if we consider that hydrogen is above helium, this element will form a nice little lens, compounding the amount of refraction that the light experiences. Even a thin layer would be significant. Imagine the light passing through hundreds of tiny little lenses. In order for helium hydride to exist, it must be in an excited state, and I think the tremendous heat of the stratosphere would be a good catalyst for this. I would like to see some experiments done with refractivity of exotic materials like these. I expect it to be significant. You see, an element on its own is not even close to the refractive index of a combined element, and the direction of refractivity may indeed change depending on the combination. For example, water is significantly more refractive than hydrogen or oxygen on their own. Why the dramatic change? Because the elements form a little lens. Let's take a look at the periodic table sorted by density. Using this, we can know how some of the elements will be ordered in the atmosphere and what direction light will bend for each layer. But don't let that dominate your calculations, because what matters is the amount of miles light will travel at the angle before crossing into the next medium. Also, it matters greatly the different materials in the atmosphere. Do not limit your bias to elements only. Refraction increases dramatically when you combine elements. For example, how does ozone affect and refract light, and how thick is the layer? Don't count on government space agencies for honest statistics here. For example, when light goes from helium to lithium, lithium is only 0.23 refractivity, and helium is more than 4 times more refractive. So again, light refracts upwards, and quite significantly. Lithium passes to argon, and light will refract downwards, and it will go down again from argon to nitrogen, and then again slightly from nitrogen to oxygen. However, a big change will happen when light passes through the water in the upper atmosphere to air, which will refract light upwards again. It's hard to say how much argon or lithium is in the atmosphere, however. Ionized particles need to be considered too, and particles such as dihydrogen, dioxygen, and so forth. It's no surprise that people see sundogs and other anomalies in the sky. If you consider that dihydrogen might exist in the hydrogen layer of the atmosphere, then when moving into helium, the refraction angle will be very significant. Light will bend for potentially hundreds of miles up towards the observer. One quick note before we proceed. Explaining our world is not easy. We realize that there will be some debate over how much light is refracted, at what point light refracts up or down, whether or not there is a dome, and so forth. We are not trying to add to the list of theories. We are simply pointing out a scientific fact that absolutely 100% must be discussed.
So these are the ions that, through atomic transitions, cause these various emission and absorption lines. And in the case of helium gas, it was identified this way. In fact, the sun is called Helios, and hence the name for helium gas. So if you have a laboratory sample of some gas, some ionized gas, you can then compare the spectrum in the laboratory of a gas to the same spectrum that you would get from a star or from a galaxy. And so what you're then doing is comparing spectral lines. These various characteristic spectral lines are easily identified. And then what is done is you look for these lines, and it's usually by their separation. You see shown here in this illustration, we see a set of spectral lines that are shifted towards the red end of the spectrum. And this is very common in extragalactic observations. Sources, galaxies emit light, and we see that the spectral lines are shifted towards the red end of the spectrum. So the question still is, what then is the mechanism that causes this shift in spectral lines? And when it's shifted toward the red end, of course, it's called redshift. There are a number of galaxies that are nearby us, including the large Andromeda galaxy, that has its spectral lines shifted slightly towards the other end, toward the blue end of the spectrum, and hence that's called blue shift. We know from repeatable laboratory type experiments that there are a number of mechanisms that do generate shifts in spectral lines, both red and blue shifts. And there's a website, a friend of mine has collated this website on the interpretation of redshifts, a quantitative comparison of redshift mechanisms. And I note that recently he's got this number up to 59. So what this means is he's been looking for all different possible mechanisms, both from laboratory physics and theoretical physics and different ideas, and he's now come up with 59 possible redshift mechanisms. With 59 possible redshift mechanisms. But the whole issue of the Big Bang and modern cosmology is built around the notion of only one of those interpretations. This is what we call cosmological redshift. But this type of redshift mechanism is the one with the least experimental justification, because how do you check it? We don't have a universe in the lab that we can play with. And the universe is so large, and this is very difficult to justify. There are even a number of theorists that have argued, for example, that no experiment you do would you ever measure this concept of expanding space, or the expansion of space. But the fundamental problem is that if this mechanism is invalid, and it, as I said, it is the weakest, then the universe, if the universe is not expanding because the redshift cannot be justified to prove an expanding universe, then where does that put the Big Bang? Because that is the fundamental core belief of the Big Bang model. There is is a lot of evidence, in fact, to suggest that the universe is not expanding. And some Christians, some creationists have used the many verses in the Bible that speak of things like God stretching, God spreading out the host of heaven, these type of verses, to then argue that those verses are describing some type of cosmological expansion of the universe, this idea of expanding space, or at least expanding universe. But if you look carefully into those verses in the Bible, you will find that the Hebrew text, the core meaning, is nothing like that. They give allusions to putting up a tent or up a canopy, like you unfold a tent and you put it up. It's not some rubbery, stretchy fabric that is often used in the description of the Big Bang. So how do we know that the universe is expanding? That is the question. The answer is we don't. We don't know that the universe is expanding. It's philosophy, it's a belief system, and this then helps us understand what is really going on in the sciences of, like, cosmology, for example. Because cosmology is really not a science in the normal, repeatable, operational laboratory sense. It really requires you take things on faith, on a belief. And the Big Bang is flawed in so many other ways. So I would think that here we are, we're presented in this modern age with an idea that the universe burst into something from absolutely nothing, that it came from nothing, no space, no time, no matter, no energy, not anything. We are told that and we are expected to believe that, and yet there's no experimental justification for it. All of those experimental justifications for various redshift mechanisms, these are all done in laboratory experiments on Earth or in our solar system. But cosmological expansion, this idea of expansion of space, this has no laboratory justification whatsoever.
If the redshifts are not pure Dopplers, then all our distance measures may be wrong. And one astronomer who believes that and has observational evidence to back it up is Dr. Houghton, formerly of the Mount Wilson Observatory and now of the Munich Institute.
My institute, saying that unless I changed my line of research, that they would have to take away my telescope time.
Dr. Art, we're delighted to have you with us. If you're right, then the effects upon all our thinking are going to be pretty profound.
Our entire view of the universe, the size and the mass and the contents, depends on this assumption that we can tell distances by redshift. If that one crucial assumption is incorrect, then our picture falls apart and we don't know very much.
Well, first of all then, will you give us the observational evidence that you have that the redshifts are not pure Doppler effect or something else superimposed on it?
Fundamentally, the only way you can tell a distance in the universe is to see an object associated with another object whose distance you know. So that if you see objects which are clustered together or are interacting together, you know that they're at the same distance. And if you find that their redshifts are much different, then you know that the redshift can't be a measure of the distance. Now, an example of this we see in this very pretty spiral galaxy with 3 quasars on the edge of it. The quasars have enormously high redshift, and the spiral galaxy has a low redshift. These quasars are so close to the galaxy that they are statistically or probably associated. We see other examples of this. For example, here are 3 other quasars associated very, very close to a galaxy. Now, in addition to these close associations, which are statistically probable, we see quasars actually linked to the galaxy. In this case, the quasar Markarian 205, just below the disturbed galaxy NGC 4319, has a very much higher redshift than the galaxy, which is only about 2,000 kilometers per second. The quasar has about 21,000 kilometers per second. The next example shows a quasar of very high redshift, 1.17, and it's connected by a luminous bridge into a disturbed galaxy with a jet that you can see here, the galaxy is again very much lower redshift, and the quasar is a high redshift. Now, not only do we have these quasars at very high redshift linked and associated with lower redshift galaxies, but also we have galaxies themselves of different redshift, which are clearly interacting, but have much different redshift. This is a famous example of one of these. There are many like this known now. The central galaxy is a disturbed Seaford galaxy with a redshift of 8,000 kilometers per second, and the companion, which is linked to it, is 16,000 kilometers per second, much higher.
Now, are you sure these links are genuine? Could it be any kind of line of sight effect?
The only possibility is that there is an accidental projection of background objects. However, these objects fall so close that the probability is overwhelmingly that they are in fact associated. One of the objects we just saw, the chances was 1 in a million for an accidental association. Another object we just saw, the chances were 1 in 50,000. And there are many of these known.
In other words, there are too many of these cases to be explained away by line of sight effects or just coincidence.
That's right. Statistical investigations of complete samples have shown repeatedly that there are these significant associations. Moreover, they are characteristic of patterns in these associations which are repeated from association to association.
Well, that means, in fact, that the redshifts are not pure Doppler effects, and they are simply not reliable as indicators of distance.
That's right. The only observational test of this assumption that we have shows that the assumption is not correct.
Well, quite apart from that, what about these bridges? How exactly are they formed, and are there any distortions between various systems?
I think a good example is this NGC 4319 object, where you can actually see the luminous connection going from the center of the galaxy to the quasar Markarian 205.
What about the significance of the bridges, then?
Well, I think the significance is very central here, because the bridge goes back exactly to the center of the galaxy. That implies that the material was ejected from the center, and since it's an active nucleus, this makes good sense. Also, we must remember that it's accepted, and it's been proven, that the galaxies eject radio material, and they eject them in equal and opposite directions, so that it's very well accepted and believed that, in fact, as we see here, for instance, an active galaxy nucleus ejects these clouds of radio material, and in this particular case, there is a quasar associated very nearby. In another example, we see this typical radio galaxy ejecting radio material in either direction, and along the line of the ejection is a compact radio source, which in fact turns out to be a quasar of very high redshift. So that, in fact, we know that galaxies eject material, and the only point is what is being ejected. Now, we can see here, I think, one of the most spectacular examples of ejection. This is a spiral galaxy called NGC 1097, and this color picture shows the long, straight jets coming out from the center of this galaxy. In the next picture, which is a black and white, shows better the contrast in jets. You can actually see a faint fourth jet, again, always the ejection and the opposite ejection, showing luminous ejection of material from this galaxy. But now in this particular galaxy, it's very interesting because there are also radio and X-ray observations. The radio observations are shown here now on the black and white photo. The radio observations are shown in yellow, and they show that the radio material also goes along the line of these ejection of these jets. Finally, the X-ray observations are shown in blue. There are clouds of X-ray material around the nucleus of the active galaxy, obviously ejected from the galaxy, and obviously ejected in the direction of these jets, which are shown here in this picture. But now the really very important and impressive point is that in many of these clouds of X-ray materials, there is a point of light which turns out to be a quasar of very high redshift. These are marked by the X's. And these quasars of high redshift, therefore, are linked to the ejection in this galaxy because the radio material, the optical material, and the X-ray material are all ejected with these quasars.
What about the remarkable galaxy Messier 82 in the Great Bear?
M82 is a very well-known galaxy. It's a very strong radio source. It's a very strong infrared source. It's very disturbed. It's been known for a long time to be ejecting material. You can see it here in the picture. And accidentally, it was discovered that there were 4 quasars very nearby. These 4 quasars are indicated by these open circles, and it's very easy to draw this ejection cone back to the center of the active galaxy, and at the base of the ejection cone you see this little radio cloud. And most important of all, again, if you look at the X-ray observations in this galaxy, you see that the X-ray material is also coming out in this direction of these quasars.
But now, what about galaxies themselves? Are there cases of galaxies which appear quite clearly to be associated and yet have totally different redshifts?
There are a large number of cases now where galaxies of quite different redshifts are seen to be interacting together, showing that they're at the same distance despite the fact that they have much different redshifts. A famous example of this, a much discussed example, is Stephans Quintet. Here you see the redder galaxies in the upper part of the picture have large redshifts, 5,700, 6,700 kilometers per second. And the blue galaxy in the lower part of the picture has a low redshift, only 900 kilometers per second. And yet you can see the interaction tail of the low galaxy due to the low galaxy interacting with the higher redshift galaxies. Now, something else is very interesting about this picture, and that is that these kinds of interacting galaxies typically occur in the outskirts, in the regions around big dominant galaxies, SB galaxies like our own M31, that dominate a group. So if you look a little ways away from Stephans Quintet, you in fact see this type of SB galaxy. It's called NGC 7331, and it looks just very similar to M31. Around that galaxy, you see other companions like Stephans Quintet, essentially the same redshift, 6,700 kilometers per second. They're obviously associated with 7331. It illustrates the kind of groups which make up space, which I think make up space, big dominant galaxies, and companions around it which have the slightly higher redshift and increasingly higher redshift, but are all located in the same region of space.
Again, do you think there are too many of these to be put down to coincidence?
Yes, yes.
What about M31 and M81? They're two of our near spirals.
This follows the development of this investigation of groups of galaxies through to the most impressive point, I think. The M31 group and the M81 group are the two groups that we know the most about. The M31 group is our local group. We know all the companions in it. The M81 group is the next nearest group. We know all the companions there. This visual shows that the biggest galaxy in each group is the SB, M31, and M81. And now all the rest of the companions, which everyone has always accepted as being companions, have systematically higher redshift. The chance of 21 out of 21 companions being of accidentally all of higher redshift is only 1 in 2 million. But on the Doppler interpretation, we should have as many coming towards us as away from us, plus and minus. Clearly that's not the case, and clearly this is a point which is just inescapable. There are no future measures are going to change these redshifts, and we're not going to find any more companions, so we have to deal with this piece of evidence.
Well, you're certainly painting an entirely new picture. How do astronomers in general view it?
I think that, that there's a great commitment to the assumption that redshifts always mean velocity, and there's a great reluctance to give up this assumption because a lot of work has been based on it, and there is this reluctance to recognize evidence which contradicts this assumption. However, if it's true that the redshifts are not always indicative of velocity, and it's continued to be believed that it is, if this assumption is continued to be believed, then we reach a very critical point in the science of extragalactic astronomy. And this is so important that I think that everybody, every person then has to make up his own mind, exercise his own judgment on this matter, and therefore I think it's very important to discuss the facts of the matter as we have here.
I'm quite sure you're right there. Well, I'm no cosmologist, as you know. Anything beyond the orbit of Neptune is rather a long way out for me. But if you're right, and there is an extra redshift superimposed on the Doppler effect, what's the cause of this non-velocity redshift?
Well, the first point I have to make is that the observations show that the present assumptions are inadequate, so we have to have some other explanation. I think there are a number of explanations which are possible.
With 59 possible redshift mechanisms.
Like it's tired?
like there's
We're off by a factor of 10 to the 120.
literally like there's
Unless I changed my line of research, that they would have to take away my telescope time.
literally
and which different people defend in a very spirited way. That's as it should be. My particular hypothesis, my working hypothesis, my explanation is that the matter which goes into making up these quasars and these higher redshift galaxies is young matter which has intrinsically high redshift, which is ejected from the galaxy and which decays and evolves as a function of time into more normal lower redshift galaxies.
Well, in general, it's generally thought that the high redshift galaxies are a long way away, and the high redshift quasars are the most distant and therefore the most luminous. What you're saying is that instead of being the most luminous, the high redshift quasars are actually the least luminous.
That's the most exciting point for me. If the material out of which these newer quasars are formed has low mass, in the sense that the constituent particles, the electrons and the protons, have lower mass, then their redshift will be high. Now, there's a rigorous theory due to Fred Hoyle and Jean Narlikar that the mass of elementary particles, the constituent particles, can evolve with time. My application of that to this situation is that it's the evolution with time of the mass of these particles which causes the initially high redshift to decay and become more normal.
In current physics, though, is this kind of creation of matter a possibility?
In past years, it has not been a very respectable thing to talk about creation of matter. And that's a little puzzling, really, because it's had a long and honorable history. The brilliant physicist Paul Dirac, more than a generation ago, talked about the creation of matter. Hoyle and Bondi and Gould talked about the creation of matter in connection with the steady state theory. Andrei Sakharov in 1965 suggested the creation of seeds of galaxy creation this way. So it has an honorable history. However, just recently it's become much more respectable because of inflation theory. Inflation theory is the attempt of physicists to explain the expanding universe by means of fundamental physics, and in that process they conceive of creation of matter. The technical term they use is fluctuations in the material vacuum, and essentially you're looking at a piece of space and the properties vary and suddenly some material appears. Well, why not? My hunch is that the material appears where material previously exists in the center nuclei of galaxies, and that then this material flows out along the bridges or perhaps along the spiral arms. And this particular spiral galaxy we see here, we see that there is a disturbance in the top, in the arm at the top, and if we look in more closely, we find a very peculiar blue object associated with that spiral arm. And if we take the spectrum of that object, we find, amazingly, that it has a redshift 1/10 the velocity of light, an enormous discrepancy.
This was published in Astronomy Journal, or Astronomy Magazine, in January 2003, and it was published there from photos taken with the Hubble Space Telescope. It was published there to try to disprove this ARP hypothesis, because ARP had previously said that this Markarian 205 object up on the top right there was physically connected to this disturbed spiral. And you see the redshift of the smaller object is 10 times that of the larger spiral galaxy. Therefore, according to Hubble law, it should be 10 times more distance, and then physically could not possibly be associated with it. Now, in that object also we see two other objects with very large redshifts, and these are called quasars. Now, quasars are believed to be black holes with matter spiraling into them. This is what is suggested by the standard secular astronomy community. ARP and others think this could be quite something different to that. if we look at this image now, the same image that was published to disprove Arp's hypothesis of connections between these highly different redshift objects, and we turn the contrast up here, we take an inverted image and turn up the contrast, you can clearly see a bridge of gas and dust material connecting the two objects. So the very image that was taken and published to disprove Arp actually supports his hypothesis. And if now look at this Markovian 205 object now in X-rays, false color imaged in X-rays, the red there is representing hydrogen gas, and it's enveloping three other objects around it. And these objects have very, very large redshifts. One of them has a redshift of 1.26, which according to the Hubble law is placing it out very, very distant. Maybe 3/4 of the distance back to the Big Bang, if you like, in a Big Bang universe. That's how far back it would be, billions and billions of light years away. Certainly it shouldn't be associated with this much, much lower redshift object that seems to be enveloping these quasar objects with large redshifts. So you see how this flies in the face of this standard Hubble interpretation of redshifts in our universe.
Suddenly there appeared press releases from Space Telescope Science Institute, which was the research arm of NASA's Hubble Space Telescope, and this press release said that they were not connected, and it gave a Hubble Space Telescope picture. It was not very deep, and you could just see two objects and no connection between them. And in this press release, then they said that this proved that there was no contradiction with the current expanding universe paradigm.
No connection between the two objects. So I looked at their picture, then I downloaded it, and it took me 5 minutes to show that it's still there. Now, I don't know what it is, but I think you face up to the existence of the feature, and then you consider conventional and unconventional explanations. But I was really surprised that they felt it necessary to issue a press release saying, it's not there, it's not real. When it's the same thing we saw 20 years ago.
But it's hard to get people to look at this because they don't understand it. You see, it's again the non-cosmological redshifts.
We realized that the people who had been processing the pictures and released it must have known that the bridge was there, and yet they chose to try to convince the public that in fact it wasn't there and that everything was right with the current expanding universe paradigm.
It's a strange attitude. I don't understand it as a scientist, really. I think that news release could have generated much more interest in astronomy than many of the more conventional news releases, because people would be talking amongst themselves, gee, what could that be? And then various people could offer scientific explanations. But to just sort of close the door, that's a manifestation of fear, I think.
But when astronomers finally looked carefully at supernovas in super distant galaxies, they discovered to their surprise that the universe is expanding faster now than it was long ago. The universe's expansion is accelerating.
No, light speed is too slow.
Light speed too slow?
Yes, we're gonna have to go right to ludicrous speed.
Ludicrous speed? Sir, we've never gone that fast before.
That's a manifestation of fear, I think.
Now, this one here is probably the cherry on the top of the cake, the absolute incontrovertible evidence that there's something wrong with the Hubble interpretation of redshift, certainly for these active galaxies and these quasar-type objects anyway.
But when astronomers finally looked carefully at supernovas in super distant galaxies,
these quasar-type objects anyway, we have NGC 7319 that has a relatively small redshift of 0.022, and in front of it we have a quasar object that's been pointed to by that black arrow, which has a redshift over 2. That should put it out only some billion years after the Big Bang, and therefore it should be totally in the background of this active spiral. But it's almost in front of the nuclear bulge of this spiral galaxy. So it can't be so bright that it's projecting in the foreground like we tend to think it's projecting up next to it. It would have to be projected through that nuclear bulges of that galaxy if that were the case. If you look closely at it, you see the quasar there, and behind it is a sort of a V-shaped entrained gas that's been ejected out of the center of the spiral galaxy. It's like the quasar itself has been ejected from the center of the disturbed spiral, and it's pulled that hydrogen gas out with it. They put a spectrograph on the gas, and that gas is relatively blue shifted toward us. In other words, it's less red shifted than the galaxy itself, and that indicates that that is a Doppler effect on the gas moving toward us relative to the center of the galaxy, which is consistent with that ARP's interpretation. And that absolutely destroys the notion that all redshifts anyway can be interpreted with this Hubble law, because that quasar is not at its Hubble, we could say Hubble law distance. It's certainly not, because it's in front of that lower redshift spiral galaxy.
I remember when I sent the paper into the first paper into Astrophysical Journal on the nature of companion galaxies, and I had a lot of them on the ends of spiral arms, so I was sure that they were connected, and I showed that they were systematically redshifted. I sent that in with naive, great expectations that people would be terribly interested and impressed on this. And the editor of the Astrophysical Journal at that time was Subrahmanyan Chandrasekhar, who had a fantastic reputation as a master theoretician and also quite an incomprehensible theoretician, and a tremendously powerful figure in the field, and editor of the Astrophysical Journal, which was probably the most powerful position in the field. And he chose not to, in his wisdom and judicial fairness, chose not to send it to a referee, but he just wrote across the paper, "This exceeds my imagination," and he sent it back to the director of my institute, Horace Babcock, with the obvious implication, you've got to do something about this staff member of yours who's doing these very bad things. And so Horace called me down in the office one day after this, and I walked in his office, into the director's office, and I saw this paper lying in front of him with Chandrasekhar's scroll across it. And Horace looked at me and said, well, he said, this is just too much, and you're going to have to start looking for another job.
I think there's a problem with graduate education. I think graduate education is not teaching students to think, to be independent researchers. I think it's teaching them to be part of a scientific society. And too much, especially students that are at the so-called elite institutions, I think they're taught too much the paradigm of their advisor.
And at the end of about a year, she had completed about a third of her program. And so she actually wrote a little paper pointing out that she was getting results very different from the ones that were expected. And we had our usual meeting. And when we got to her program, which was an ongoing program, so people just looked it over, the leading extragalactic astronomer on my committee of that day immediately said, well, look, she's getting this result. It doesn't fit. It has to be wrong. I recommend that we stop the program. That was his position. And what was interesting to me was I sat there and listened to this discussion. And the majority of the people, because of his level of knowledge and authority, went along with him. So the recommendation of the committee was that we stop the program. Well, I had the last word, so I ignored it, but most people don't. And the peer review system and NASA itself, which is very conformist, will always do just that. That's one of the reasons why the road ahead is hammered out. As Hoyle said, Anytime you point a new telescope at the sky now, you're only going to find what you already know is up there.
The Thunderbolts project came out with something that was really pretty extraordinary this week, but I wanted to start it out with, you know, something that NASA has said, of course, and, you know, like, who was it that said it last week? It was Chris said it last week, that basically the electric universe theory is pretty much, you know, banned off of Wikipedia. I don't know if that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me. I do know that they don't like to address it because, you know, it's very clearly an electrical / magnetic construct, and you know, they just don't want that getting out there, I think, because that is the secret to revealing our true cosmology. So here is something that NASA has been, you know, quoted as saying: on the cosmological scale, there's no data to suggest that magnetic fields are present. They certainly are not important in the dynamics of the universe for any reasonable range of field strengths consistent with present observational constraints. Of course, this is by NASA, which is absolute rubbish, because every university that has a astronomy or astrophysics department realizes that there absolutely is magnetic lines. Not only are there magnetic flux lines, but they stretch in their model hundreds, if not thousands, of light years. Okay, so that's a bunch of nonsense. So what I want to do is, and this is just one quote that is on their newest, Thunderbolt's newest, that they got from a guy at University of Toronto. And this one was just released on the 14th by Thunderbolt's project. But anyway, they say, not only are entire galaxies magnetic, but the faint, delicate threads joining galaxies are magnetic too. Everywhere we look in the sky, we find magnetism. And of course, if we let this play a little bit, I'm just going to let it move up to the next quote, which is going to be coming right up here. I should probably just play it faster. All right, then they say, in general, we don't know how such magnetic fields are generated, nor how these large-scale magnetic fields affect galaxy formation and evolution, which, of course, I know how they are. I get it. And that, again, that's when you bring it back to, you know, something a little bit more local. So then they say, understanding the role that magnetic fields play in the evolution of galaxies and their environment is a fundamental question in astronomy that remains to be answered. Of course, Jane Kaczmarek, University of Sydney. So what I want to do is I want to play the very first part of this video, and this will be under fair use because we are commenting on it, and hopefully Thunderbolts wouldn't mind anyway, but we are going to call fair use on this, and we're going to play like the first 4 minutes of this, and then I'm going to make a little bit of a comment on it. So let's go forward here.
Universe, brought to you by the Thunderbolts Project at thunderbolts.info. What fills the vast space in the unimaginable distances separating celestial objects in the cosmos? Space is indeed a big place, but it's not a perfect void or vacuum. Today, this fact is acknowledged even by the NASA Space Agency, which states in an official report from 2014. Space may appear empty, a soundless vacuum, but it's not an absolute void. It flows with electric activity that is not visible to our eyes. The movement of electrically charged particles requires a medium, and that medium in space is plasma, or the so-called fourth state of matter. Plasma is commonly referred to as a gas whose constituent atoms have been split into electrons and ions, which move independently of each other. Well over 99% of the visible universe is composed of plasma, including the Earth's ionosphere.
One thing I want to comment about that is, in order for there to be gas then in a supposed perfect vacuum, I'm not even sure where they come up with that, because it would be immediately drained off into the vacuum itself. It would be dispersed everywhere, and there would be no place for these electrical currents to be taking place. So my point here is that, you know, even though NASA is saying that, yeah, now they're finally saying in stark contrast to themselves that there are these electrical currents, and of course, what do electrical currents produce but magnetic fields? But they're saying that the catalyst for this is plasma, and plasma requires a gas, which it requires it to be charged. Now, the problem with that, again, is you run into all kinds of problems with gas dispersion throughout free space and all this stuff. But like Iru was just talking about earlier, yes, in the upper atmosphere there are all kinds of gases, and the reason that they're there is because they are not allowed to escape, because there is some sort of a lid, if you will, over the flat Earth, whether it's a firmament, a dome, whatever, or electromagnetic in property, or crystalline, whatever. It's because it is a closed system, and what NASA is calling this plasma is it's only even possible in a closed system, because again, when you think about the idea of a gas in a perfect vacuum, that's just nonsense. It doesn't make any sense at all, because it would disperse all over the place. So what they're actually seeing is they're seeing these electrical manifestations that are indeed propagating through plasma, but it's not thousands of light years away. This is a very, very local phenomenon. And again, if we weren't in a contained system, we would not be able to keep these gases there. They would be literally sucked off, or blown off, I should say, by any pressure out into the far reaches of space. So I just wanted to say that, but the bottom line is that the cosmology of the Earth is very definitely being looked at in a very different way, in that they are understanding that gravity just doesn't cut it. When they try to apply the Newtonian or Einsteinian model of gravity to deep space, it doesn't add up, and that's why they have to constantly make up things like dark matter and all kinds of weird things like black holes and stuff like that. Whereas again, if you simply bring this idea of the electric universe and you put a lid on our construct, where we can actually have these gases in the upper layers of the atmosphere without them being blown off into space, then all of a sudden this makes a whole lot more sense. Then you can have plasma, then you can have charges going through the plasma. This is what gives us the clear indication of electromagnetic lines of force that they are measuring in abundance. Every university in the world is measuring these, in stark contrast to NASA's BS statement that they're not there. So that's all I'm saying, is that yes, they're so close to being on the right track, but somebody really needs to ask the question at NASA, or not just NASA, because we know they're BS, and we also know NASA knows the answer to this, but people need to start asking the question, is how are the gases able to form in clouds or be together in clouds? And if they talk about certain gas clouds that are up there, and what exactly is keeping them together? Is it supposed to be gravity? And when the current passes through them, shouldn't that disperse the gravity or actually burn up the gas or do something with it? Why would it remain in a static form? That doesn't make any sense. So these are the kind of questions that I think eventually even the guys at Thunderbolts Project are going to start asking about this model. And what Iro has explained here about these specific gases, the oh crap, I forgot the gas he was talking about, but anyway, but that acts as a natural dielectric. These are exactly the kind of things that we need to create the electrical construct and plasma construct in our skies, that will give us then our luminaries, our stars, and a lot of the phenomenon, the lights in the sky that we see from the aurora borealis on out. So that's basically what I wanted to say about this, and I want to go back to Iro because he's still got a bunch of great stuff, and I will elaborate on this a little bit more next week. But as I've said many times before, the guys on the Thunderbolts Project are so close to being right on the money, but still there are so many things that are not explained as to how this gas propagates through space if there's no quote-unquote atmosphere up there. It's supposedly being distributed in what we are calling, or what they are calling, somewhat close to a perfect vacuum. So any comments on that before? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah,
John.
I was just going to say before we move on, I totally agree. It's spot on about gases in the so-called vacuum of space. I did a video not too long ago. It's flat Earth star and planet formations. is totally impossible. And it runs into the similar problems, but there's so many catch-22s with just basic fluid dynamics. I mean, fluid dynamics 101 stuff that anybody that knows anything about how gases operate and how a vacuum and gases operate, you can't have the atmosphere adjacent to a vacuum. You can't have nebulae in the vacuum of space that are creating stars and planets allegedly. You just can't have that sort of thing in a negative pressure environment. Gases, fluids, whatever, even plasma should technically expand to fill the void of that vacuum, that negative pressure environment, which is allegedly infinite in the globe Earth theory model. And so, you can't demonstrate anywhere in nature where fluids or gases or plasma behaves like this. So why is that a staple of the globe Earth theory? I mean, it is just ridiculous to me, just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. I totally agree. And somebody just made a comment in the chat, well, if there's enough gas out there, gravity will affect it. And of course, if that was true, then we would see these gases in spheres not being quite so nebulous, right? So the gravity, of course, they can't demonstrate that. There is no way that can be demonstrated, period.
Well, it's another one of the catch-22s, because the atmosphere plane, or the atmosphere in quotes, is more dense lower to the ground and less dense, allegedly at super high altitudes in the globe theory. And so gravity, not only would it be affecting those gases less and less with altitude because of the density, but also because of the proximity. Those are the two key ingredients to quote-unquote gravity, is density of the objects and the proximity of the two objects. And so as the gas gets less and less dense with altitude and the proximity increases with altitude, then you have sort of multiple exponential factors that are, that would theoretically have gravity affecting the higher altitude gases less and less and less with altitude. So how does that cap off, right, at a vacuum? I mean, come on, just give me a break.
Yeah, it doesn't work. And another thing I also wanted to comment is, they're describing this, when you look at the sun and you look at the holes in the sun or the sunspots, they look through them and there's basically nothing there, and the temperature is thousands and thousands of degrees less, which would lend great credibility, in my mind anyway, to the sun being some sort of a projection. But I did notice a comment last week that somebody was saying that, those magnetic lines, that what we were calling magnetic lines of force around the solar eclipse, was actually, what did he say? Something else. But what he did say was that the magnetic lines of force coming from the sun actually looked more spaghetti-like. And it's like, no, that isn't the magnetic lines of force, because the magnetic lines of force will remain in a toroidal construct. What appears to be spaghetti-like are these plasma filaments that are going up. That's the thing that looks spaghetti-like. So I did see that. I can't remember who the guy was. Fudmotten, I think, was the guy that said that. But that is absolutely wrong, and I just wanted to make a comment about that. So yes,
Good point.
Yeah, in order to have, gas floating around in space, then if it's attracted to each other, if there is a gravitational force that is actually doing that, then it would have to act like every other thing that they tell us it does in space, and that would be that it would have to form up into a ball. Well, that isn't how it works at all. We see these supposed plasma fields or gas fields, nebulas that are, going across, stretching across light years supposedly, and they have no uniform form to them. They do not appear to be contracting into any type of sphere or anything like that. So again, it's a whole lot of conjecture on the astrophysicist's part, and of course NASA's part, and all of this is to ignore the idea that the universe is indeed electric, and that most of the phenomenon, if not all of the phenomenon we see in our skies, can absolutely be shown to be an electric effect.
Nobody on Earth has ever seen this before. Each one of these little LED cells emits RGB. You can actually choose whether red, green, or blue, or have it emit white light by emitting all three channels at once, which is what I have turned on right now. All red, green, and blue on each one of these little 5mm LED cells are turned on identically. They're spaced roughly, I think, 1 3/4 inches apart around the ferrocell, invented by Tim Vanderelli. Nobody's ever seen this before, ever. Let's turn off the lights and show you something It proves my theory beyond any shadow of a doubt. Let me see. Let's come to the dielectric inertial plane first. Pardon for the light streaming in. I'm making this video in the daytime, early morning. And what you can see here is red, green, and blue along only the dielectric inertial plane, and you can see one of the poles here is red and one is green. Remember, all LEDs around the ring are emitting RGB at the same time, supposedly to create white light, but it creates white light by emitting RGB at the same time. So, as you see here, now watch. See, this proves not only that the dielectric inertial plane, according to my premise of the z-axis radial dielectric of the missing geometry of light, but you can see that the centrifugal here is green and the centrifugal here is red. Now, since all diodes are emitting the same color, this proves one direction of spin here and another direction of spin here. And all three channels only combine on the dielectric inertial plane or the centripetal reciprocating magnetism. Now watch as this goes from green to red, and this one goes from red to green. And watch this. No one has ever seen this before on a ferrocell. The red patterns are the centrifugal magnetism, but the RGB lines where you have your rainbow patterns, now this is deeper in, this is along the inertial plane. It looks like it's at the top, but it's along, if you look at it at an angle, you can tell that it's on the inertial plane. It's not up at the surface at the quote-unquote polarity. But this line and this line, you can see the RGB. So by using RGB diodes, I'm able to differentiate centrifugal and centripetal patterns using light deflection from its dielectric radial z-axis radial component. And the same thing on the other pole. You'll notice this one is green dominantly on the centrifugal, and if I flip it over to the other pole, because we have inverse spin on the centrifugal, this one is red dominantly, except for the centripetal, which is RGB. You can see a little rainbow there. All these RGB patterns, except for the one deeper here, which is the inertial plane, all these red patterns are centrifugal, but the rainbow patterns are centripetal. No one has ever seen this before. This proves my theory beyond any shadow of a doubt. Of course, idiots, skeptics, and morons with 1,000 proofs will never believe anything. But look here. You see how we have one pole green and one pole red, and only RGB together at the inertial plane. Remember, once again, the diodes are equally spaced around this lens. Every little 4mm LED is emitting RGB at the same time, all of them. What's happening is the dielectric is attractive to all colors because the z-axis radial dielectric, but one clockwise spin is causing green dominance, and the other counterclockwise spin is causing red dominance. But they will invert colors as I switch them around. Look at that. No one has ever before seen this, ever. Now I want you to understand the importance of this. This is the dielectric inertial plane of our 1-inch cube neodymium iron boron N48 Gauss magnet. You see the three channels together only along the inertial plane or along the centripetal returning magnetism. As you can see here, this side, centrifugal, deflects the green and the blue, therefore we only have red on the centrifugal. But on our centripetal, since centripetal is reintegration into the inertial plane, we have RGB together. Now the one down here that is white light, RGB together, is the inertial plane. It is deeper. If you're able to look at it at an angle, you're able to see a better 3D view. So remember, this side centrifugal is red. Let's flip it over to the other side. This side centrifugal is green. But of course the centripetal, the same as the inertial plane, the same as the other side, this side centripetal is RGB together. Sorry, I need to do this much later at night. The light's starting to pour in at 6:30 in the morning here, and the window's behind me. But watch as the poles change color as the dielectric of the light is deflected. We have red over here now, and now we have green. But, of course, our dielectric influence of our light, we have all three channels together, but only along the inertial plane or the returning centripetal. Centrifugal is one color. You can see it here as red. Same here, different color, but centrifugal is one color. Integrating centripetal is RGB. RGB white light right here along the inertial plane. You can see the red, green, and blue together. Now look, this side centrifugal is green, this side centrifugal is red. Proving inverse polarity spin. This, the first time anybody's ever seen this. This is July 29th, 2014. We have centrifugal red, we have centrifugal green. And we have our inertial plane dielectric. I'll film this again when it's really dark so you'll get a better image, and I'll zoom in better. I'm going to try to zoom in now so you can see it. You can see the three channels here. Red, green, and blue at our inertial plane. You zoom out. So, you're seeing it first. Other than me, you're the next person to see it, this phenomena on Earth. This proves my theory on both the nature of magnetism, the principle of the dielectric inertial plane, and also on the missing secret of the geometry and composition of light, that it is not electromagnetic in its entirety, but has a z-axis radial dielectric. This proves that. Whether you believe that or not, I don't care, but it does prove it. There's absolutely no other explanation for this, along with my many other models, along with another invention from a friend of mine up north, along with the mathematical formulas of Dr. Olav Defimchenko, along with some of the obscure notes of Oliver Heaviside. Look, you see how each pole is a different color? Once again, I hate to repeat myself, so important. Each one of these little diodes, let me turn the light on again since we're done with that demonstration. Each one of the diodes ringed around here, here. Each one is emitting red, green, and blue simultaneously. Not white light, but white light from the RGB so closely together. But the magnetism and the dielectricity is deflecting it. That's why you have one pole one color, the other pole another color, and the rainbow pattern of the dielectric or the centripetal returning reciprocating magnetism. This is the coffin nail. It's over with. I've got 13 models to prove my theory now. Most people don't even need more than 3 to prove a theory. It's not a theory anymore. It's confirmed. It's over with. You can believe it or not believe it, but it's over with. I'm glad to share this discovery with you tonight, and I will make a better film of this tomorrow using other magnets and darker light because the sun's starting to come in behind me. But I'm happy to be right. You're here to witness it. I contacted the inventor of the ferrocell yesterday after making this discovery, and he confirmed to me that of everybody that has a ferrocell, nobody has ever witnessed this before. I talked to him via phone, and he was excited, and this not only proves my principle of the missing secrets of magnetism, but also proves my principle in the last chapter of the book on the missing z-axis radial dielectric component of electromagnetism, which completely dismisses the photoelectric effect and it gets rid of the wave-particle duality. Now, here you see white light. Remember, we have a ring of 10 LEDs. They're all emitting. They only have less than 1 millimeter separation between them. They're on 3.5 millimeter LEDs. Each LED is emitting a blue, a green, and a red separately. Together they create white light. But if I bring my inertial plane here, you can see I have a greenish blue on this pole and a reddish blue on this pole. And in the center I have red, green, and blue. I was so tired last night. I understood the implications of this, but since I've been awake for like 4 days, I didn't make the full implication until I woke up, and I thought, well, duh. The reason that the blue only exists, and you can actually see it over here, concentrated at the dielectric inertial plane, is because the wavelength of blue has a higher dielectric capacitance, just as proving my theory. That's why you have all three colors only concentrated at the dielectric inertial plane. And as you can see here, we have green on one pole and red on the other. And why is that? Since all diodes are emitting RGB at the same time, if you actually take the strip out, it is so intensely bright white, it's extremely intense. You cannot see the RGB separately. Now if I take it on either pole, what you see down here is a shadow image, the RGB at the inertial plane. It kind of looks, you can actually see it if you're down on an angle, but with RGB separation like this, you can see the centripetal. Now the centrifugal is only red, but the centripetal is also RGB. You can see it very weakly here and here. This large RGB down here, here, and here, where all three colors are, is further down at the midsection of the magnet where the dielectricity is concentrated at, is forced to. Not located at, but concentrated at. This is amazing. Like I said, this is the second part of the first time anybody has ever seen this. I contacted the inventor of this cell. He's told me, upon reception of the cell, that he's tested this cell endless ways. Him and his companions have tested it just enormous ways. They never thought of this before, but they weren't trying to uncover the secrets of magnetism. Now, the reason one side is green and the other side is red is because you get clockwise spin on one centrifugal, counterclockwise in the other, but on the centripetal, you can see all three colors coming together because it is this lowest pressure gradient for entry to the dielectric inertial plane, which is concentrated at and forced at the midpoint of every magnet, which you see right here. You see our RGB channels located at the center. So this is stunning. Now let's look at something else to prove this. Remember, red has less dielectricity in its pulse capacitance as per my theory, which is now proven. This is the 6th testing methodology, not the first, but the 6th. But this is also the first time anybody on Earth has ever seen this before. But let's take a look at the three channels separately. Let's take a look at red. Now, if you can see how intense and wide the red channel is, and how either centrifugal is rather well defined. Whoops. Let me turn it back on here. I hit the wrong button. Green is slightly tighter, so let's go red. Watch how it gets tighter on the inertial plane. Red, green, and blue. See how blue is almost non-existent? It is especially non-existent at either inertial plane. I mean, at either a centrifugal pole. But you can see it along the inertial plane. A very thin line. Now let's do the strobe effect and you can see the difference. Watch as when blue comes up, you'll notice that it disappears immediately here, and it disappears along the centrifugal of either pole. You'll notice that it goes from red, very visible, green to midway, blue to almost non-existent, except for along the inertial plane. You'll also notice on the blue channel, because the wavelength has a higher dielectric capacitance, which terminates at the dielectric inertial plane, which is where it is attracted to, you'll notice that the blue channel vanishes much sooner than the red or the green. Can you see that? Let me let it shift again. Let me do it this way so you can see it. It's red, green, blue is almost gone. And the centrifugal is displaced into almost nothing on the blue channel. Wonderful discovery. This is the 6th proof I have about the missing geometry of light. It explains the false conclusions of the correct observations of the photoelectric effect, for which that moron Einstein won a Nobel Prize. His observations were correct, but his conclusions were utterly wrong. Typical idiot. Once again, 2 different colored poles due to clockwise and counterclockwise, divergent, inverse polarity, clockwise or counterclockwise. They're obviously both spinning in the same directions, but that's why it's splitting up. All these LEDs are emitting RGB at the same time, and you could see our dielectric inertial plane contains all 3 components. Together we have our white light. Let's try another magnet, one a lot more powerful, a large disc, 1 1/4 inch N50, I believe. And you can see the definition a little bit better. This is a really powerful, rather expensive disc magnet. Slightly dangerous too. You can see the white light we have along our dielectric inertial plane right here, and we have our greenish blue here and our reddish blue here. All blue is pushed away from the centrifugal magnetism. Why? Because blue has a higher dielectric capacitance. And what have I been telling you about in this entire series? Electricity and magnetism move 180 degrees opposite each other. Now in a binding system like this, they seem apparently 90 degrees opposite each other, but remember the max inverse throw of 2 conjugate fields that are naturally a 180 degree repulsive is a double hyperbola like this, which is an inverse sphere, and an inertial plane. Remember, every part of the magnet contains dielectricity and magnetism. It occurs at every point in the, it is point in specific incommensurability. But just like fluid dynamics, the dielectricity is displaced, just like jumping your bathtub displaces the water. The capacitance increase from the dielectricity causes an increase of macromagnetic magnetism, and how these fields conjugate, naturally, logically, sensibly, demonstrably provable by myself. I've already made, what, 26, 27 videos. I mean, I could literally make another 30 more. I've got like another 120 pages to add to the book, but I mean, there isn't a person alive that can refute me on any debate in a public forum on discussing magnetism. I'll trounce every single person walking this earth and breathing when it comes to the definition of magnetism. I wish you could see the steeper angle here. It's kind of hard to hold the camera, but you can actually see all 3 channels. Let's go back again and take a look at red. You see how wide the red channel is at the dielectric inertial? And the green, a little bit thinner, and blue is almost non-existent. Okay, here we go to like a purple view, where it's trying to give more blue. That's why you see the centrifugal are undefined. Green, blue, red. And here's our quote-unquote white light. But our white light, you can kind of see it over here at the edge. It is white light, but it is 3 tiny diodes within each little diode cell, emitting very intense red, green, and blue frequencies, which, if you were to look at it out in the dark or in open light, looks intensely white. But due to inverse centrifugal spin, and the fact that blue has a higher dielectric capacitance, which is repulsed by the magnetism, is pushed away from either pole of magnetism. Remember, magnetism is, as Faraday and Maxwell state, the dielectric field. Magnetism repulses dielectricity. That is why you will not find much blue at either pole. Now, that is why it looks bluish green and bluish red, a slight purple color and a slight darker green color. but the blue is concentrated only along the dielectric inertial. It is pushed there or at reintegration of the centripetal. Let's take a look at one of the poles. The reason this doesn't look like a super hypertrochoid is because there are only 10 LED cells versus the prior one that I was using, which has a lot more ringing this lens ferrocell. But these RGB channels are further down at the midsection, so ignore those. But all the centripetal are red, and all the centrifugal are red, but all the centripetal are RGB. You can see 3 strands of RGB entering into the centripetal. This is the first time using a ferrocell anybody has defined, and I confirmed with the inventor yesterday, the first time ever anybody has done this, and he congratulated me on this discovery. Actually, the potential for this in invention is kind of stunning. I've thought of a lot of things myself. You see the white light here? This is all 3 channels together, and that's why we have only red and greenish over here, because the high dielectric capacitance, which is repelled by magnetism, is pushed away from either pole of magnetism or the dielectric field. Magnetism, remember, is definitionally spatial, radiative, centrifugal. The high dielectric capacitance of blue, and I got confirmation from this today from another person who said that his spectrometer showed that the dielectric inertial plane ate up the blue frequency of light. So I got further proof today. So I'm so happy to show you this, and like I said, this is the second video. The one I made really late last night. The sun was pouring through the window. First time anybody has ever seen this. This is my 6th proof now. I had 5, now I have 6. This is the cherry on top of a mountain of evidence. Now all I am interested in is proving this. I've proved it and I proved it and proved it. If this were a court of law, it would be over with. It'd be done. I'm not interested in convincing hard-headed skeptics with their head in the sand, because I've slaughtered their sacred cow concepts of what electromagnetism is, because it is not electromagnetic. Oliver Heaviside hinted at this. The formulas from Dr. Olaf Defimchenko's work absolutely state that it demands it. He won an enormous amount of awards, 2 PhDs, highly acclaimed, only died a few years ago. Extremely well acclaimed person. His books are incredible works of art. Unfortunately, he never draws the correct conclusion on what his formulas actually point to. I, however, he got 95% of the work done, but I got the remaining 5% done. But I'm just so happy to show you this. This is really the icing on the cake. Because all these many centuries, people have been trying to figure out what the nature of light is, and they came up with these wave-particle dualities, which spawned quantum nonsense. Spawned general relativity. There is no more wave-particle duality. Now we understand that electromagnetism, and I will expand on that in the last half of the book. Of course, it's obviously not about magnetism, but there are only 2 fundamental principles in the universe, co-principles, dielectricity and the dielectric field, which is the discharge of dielectricity, and that is magnetism. Magnetism is radiation by definition. That is what polarization means. Polarization, radiation, the creation of space. That which makes mass massive, okay, is not in the nucleus. It is the interatomic volume. What gives volume or polarization or space in picometers to all atoms is not dielectricity, it is not the nucleus, it is magnetism. This is the first time you have ever seen this. It is an enormous discovery. I proved with the inventor earlier that no one has ever witnessed this before or recorded this using the ferrocell, so I'm so happy to show this to you. I'm only interested in discovery. Everybody else out there flaps their lips, and they're so angry. A few of them are anyway. Some people are very proud to finally, actually, like I am, to uncover things. But some people have their head in their sand, and they're just so upset that you've slaughtered their pathetic sacred cow, because it's like someone that went to dragon hunting school for 30 years, and you knock on the door, and you come in, and you say, hey, you've been wasting 30 years. There's no such thing as dragons. And, they'll vociferously protest and tell you you're crazy, you're insane. Well, Einstein said this. Well, Richard Feynman said that. Well, so what? The facts speak for themselves. Now, while it is true that you can come up with the correct experiments and draw the incorrect conclusions, I have proof after proof after proof that this is the missing secret of light, that it does have a z-axis radial dielectric component, which also proves and backs up my premise, among 14 other methodologies that I have, to show the absolute nature of what a magnet is from top to bottom, inside and out, how it works, why it is the way it is. Unravel the mystery. I will keep unraveling it for you. Although the second edition is full, it still needs more expanding. But it is full as it is, but there's a lot more to introduce, a lot more diagrams and pictures and proofs and stuff that will explain things and help you understand better. So I'm working very hard on that. There's so much to include, which is a good thing. I mean, it's better to have too much to include than not enough. When someone doesn't have enough, then usually their theory is pretty pathetic or weak. But I have enormous amounts to show you. And people love all the diagrams and the pictures, and especially the videos like this. This video might be a little too long and verbose and boring, but no one has ever seen this before. I confirm with the inventor of this device that no one's ever tested it like this before, and no one's ever seen this before. But no one was looking at this. They just figured, well, they'd look at magnetism, but they didn't know what they were looking for. I mean, I knew what to look for, which is why I tore this apart last night and removed the white LEDs and stuck in the RGB LEDs. I mean, I had an epiphany. It's like, well, obviously I need to test with RGB LEDs, because if my premise is correct, then the RGB will be separated. The red, green, blue will be separated. It'll be a different color at each pole, and all three will be at the center at the inertial plane. And guess what? When I built it, I was 100% accurate. 100%. Here it is. Produce it yourself. Don't complain to me. There's no trickery here. I've shown pictures of these little LEDs to people yesterday on a couple of forums, actually 3. So I'm so glad you watched, and I'm going to make a bunch of more instructional videos on uncovering the missing secrets of magnetism, getting into some of the fundamentals that people don't understand about incommensurability and why the dielectricity is forced to or is concentrated at the inertial plane. It is really rather simple. It's not hard at all. It's kind of a hard concept at first because our minds aren't taught to think that way, especially from pathetic public school systems. We just did not grow up with a special sort of thinking methodology that ancient peoples used way back then. I mean, we marvel at the amazing creations of the pyramids and the Library of Alexandria, which of course is gone to us, but all the ancient marvels, all that stuff was created by a lost thinking methodology called retroduction. Anyway, I know I talked too much on this. I repeated myself several times, but sometimes, especially on new concepts, well, this isn't new. This was here the whole time. You just had to have the right person to know what the hell they were looking for. And I predicted with 100% accuracy that this is exactly what I'd find, and I was 100% proven accurate. So I'm glad to bring this to you. If you have any questions, let me know. I've duplicated this. I had a question today. I said, well, have you duplicated this with other magnets and other strength magnets? Yes, it works with square magnets, round magnets, disc magnets, all shapes and sizes, and all various strengths. So you will get this effect off a tiny little 1/4-inch square magnet. The exact same thing, so it doesn't matter. So it's over with. I mean, I can actually say it's over with. I don't have to convince anybody. I only have to prove it. And if this were a jury trial, it's over. It's done and it's over. First, I thought I would show you a ring magnet. Now, you can see I have 7 RGB LEDs here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, the more LEDs that I add, I mean, there's only so many LEDs that I can add, but the more I add, the more complete the pattern is of the hypertrochoid. And people say, well, what's a hypertrochoid pattern? Well, it's a spirograph pattern. Then people realize what you're talking about. So let's take a look at this before we get on to the main demonstration. Then after that, I'm going to switch over to white light LEDs, and you're going to see something completely, well, you're going to see the same thing, except a much more detailed image. So you can see that instead of a complete hypertrochoidal pattern, we're seeing a partial one, but that's only due to the number of RGB LEDs that are painting this. Now, right now, I have white set on my RGB LEDs. Let me put it on blue, green, red. Now, the higher the frequency towards the blue, you'll notice there'll be less light, especially at the dielectric inertial plane, but I'm going to show you that in a second. Let me throw it on white. White is just RGB lit on all of them. But I want you to notice something before I switch over to the regular magnet instead of the ring light. Now you notice this blue lobe on the interior of the ring light. Now as I move it towards the light, we'll get a blue shift, and further away we'll get a red shift. I can't demonstrate that very well using the ring magnet, but let's do it in a very obvious fashion so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And let's use, you look for the pole on this one. Let's first throw it on the pole. Bring it down here so you can see it. This is either pole of a 1-inch N55 Gauss neodymium iron boron. Like I said, you can see each point here. You can see the red, the green, and the blue. I'm filming this on a Zeiss 50mm, by the way. F1.4 Zeiss, Carl Zeiss. Let me see if I can come into focus a little better. There we go. You're going to see a lot more complete hypertrochoidal pattern once I switch to the white lights in the next video. Let me center this up. Now let's throw things along the dielectric inertial plane and show you something that nobody on Earth has ever seen before. Okay, now we're going to see the phase shift. Okay, well that's the phase shift. By the way, this was my discovery. You'll notice if you look closely, if I turn the magnet right, you can see a little bit better. But along the dielectric inertial plane, here's either pole. I wish you could actually see this in person, because you literally do have over 3 inches of depth on a ferrofluidic solution that is less than 1 micron thin. Oh my God. Here along the dielectric inertial plane, either these little black hole looking formations over here, that's either pole respectively. Now, my discovery, uncovering missing secrets of magnetism, not only did I make this discovery last year, but I also discovered the mathematical formula for the phase shift existing at a ratio that is unrelated to the Gaussian flux, which is equal on either pole of a magnet, that this phase shift of electromagnetic retardation from phase shift polarity on a coherent dielectric field, as Faraday called it, i.e. magnetism, exists at a ratio of 1 to 5. This accounts for EM retardation, which is a known entity. Now, relativity has incorrectly explained this to be due to space warpage, but we know this is purely an electrical phenomena. Recent discoveries in they call it gravitomagnetic phenomena discovered from a spatial probe prove that this be the case. We can use simple Steinmetz and Maxwellian equations for magnetism in place of relativity's equations as far as warp space, because Tesla said this was an absolute absurdity, and of course it is. But here you can see the RGB LED along the dielectric inertial plane, the red, the green, and the blue. But you'll notice, if I clear the ferrocell out here, I actually didn't have to do that. You'll notice a green shift over here and a red shift over here. Now, I don't know which pole of the magnet I have underneath the ferrocell right now, but I do because of color. Now, green is a higher frequency, it's toward the blue end of the spectrum, and red, of course, is a lower potency electromagnetic radiation. Light is a coaxial circuit, Z-axis dielectric with transverse electrical and magnetic. Remember, electricity is phi times psi equals Q in Planck electrification. Electricity is a hybrid of dielectricity and magnetism. This is an irrefutable fact. I mean, this has been known for a very long time. But what you're seeing here is not a Gaussian reading. We're not taking Gaussian flux densities, which would be equal along either pole. What we're seeing is a phase disparity shift on either pole. And hold on a second, I'm going to show you the important part. Okay, because I've shown this video last year, and this was my discovery. Even the inventor of the ferrocell didn't know about this, and he confirmed it himself after I told him about it. Here you can see the RGB right along the dielectric inertial plane, the midpoint of the magnet, as the point of the self-centering incommensurate point between either pole. Now, a magnet does not have poles, it has the inverse of counter space. Magnetism is a dielectric field, quote unquote, from Faraday.
But here you can see the green shift, here you can see the red shift. This will be tilted blue, but it's shifted towards the blue. And it exists at a ratio of 5 to 1, or 1 to 5, depending on which side of the pole you're looking at. Obviously, now over here we're looking at compression. And over here we're looking at rarefaction. That's why it's redshift. So a magnet that is perfectly still. See, nothing in the universe is perfectly still. This is why Newton's third law is incorrect. Nothing is perfectly still. But the phase shift disparity of any magnet, whether it's a powerful neodymium or ceramic or samarium cobalt, doesn't matter what it is, always exists. And this is at the atomic scale as well, because the only thing that defines a magnet is a coherent polarized field throughout the entire atomic that exists on the macro scale, and therefore we have the magnet. We have a coherent magnetic and dielectric field. Magnet has been made coherent. The same difference between 5 watts of incoherent light radiation from a light bulb versus 5 watts of a laser. One is worthless to read by, and the other one will burn a hole in your ass. Okay, we're talking about a coherent field here. Now what we're seeing is the phase shift. Okay, doesn't matter how I turn the magnet, we're actually seeing the phase shift. Okay. Now let's show you something else. We know blue shift, and you know what red shift is, or at least I hope you do. Something's moving away from you, red shifted. Light source is moving towards you, it's blue shift. And now let's take a look at something, okay? Getting blue shift. Over here we're getting red shift. We move over here, we're getting blue shift. Over here we're getting red shift. Doesn't matter how I turn the magnet, doesn't matter if I use white light LEDs or RGB LEDs, or if I turn on, it'd be harder to see, however. Doesn't matter if I turn on the red, the green, or the blue. You can't see it in the blue because it's all blue light. But if you were able to discriminate with tighter eyes, you'll actually see, of course, this blue is brighter because I've moved towards this. I've got blue shift over here, and over here I have red shift. That's why the blue is weaker here. Now, I really wished you could see this in person, because you're looking at less than 1 micron thin of ferrofluid, but you're actually seeing nearly 3 inches of depth. And you can't see that through what I'm videotaping right now through this Carl Zeiss lens, my Nikon D750, but it is there. Many people that have handheld the ferrocell can obviously see that, and they're going, oh my God, where is this depth coming from? It's far, 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 far deeper than even the best art hologram. The hologram on your credit card is crap compared to an art hologram. And the ferrocell makes even the world's best art holograms look like crap by comparison. Most people have actually never seen this device before. You can get this ferrocell. No, I get no kickbacks. I get no money from it off of ferrocell.us. You can purchase the ferrocell if you want. No, I'm not selling anything. It's not my invention. It's Tim's invention. But let me put it back on white light. Blue, green, red. You notice why the red's so much brighter? And the blue's so much dimmer? Well, I've talked about in that prior videos. Let me throw it on red here again, let the camera adjust. But, whichever way I'm actually dragging the magnet, I have blue shift towards approaching and red shift towards trailing. Blue shift, red shift. Doesn't matter how I turn it. Blue shift, red shift. Blue shift, red shift. Blue shift, red shift. Doesn't matter. I flip the magnet around to another side of the dielectric inertial plane. Doesn't make any difference. Blue shift, red shift. But at the center of the ferrocell, we know that this is the North Pole and that's the South Pole because this is red shifted and that is blue shifted. It's greenish blue, but that's the blue shift. That's the South Pole, this is the North Pole of the magnet. This is exactly why I made a 6-video series a few months ago showing you that these are experiments were replicated by Rawls and Davis many years ago, why seeds, North Pole exposure, South Pole exposure, come out completely different. The North Pole seeds come out tasting bad. I've done this experiment over and over and over and over and over. It's always the same. It affects worms, chickens, any and all seeds. It affects animal growth. They've tested rats, chickens as they're hatching. It tested anything that grows. And it will always have a phase shift. Always. This is seed exposure only, but you can do seed exposures as they're germinating too. Same effect, except slightly more dramatic. Blue shift, red shift. Blue shift, red shift. Nobody has ever seen this before in relationship to the ferrocell. Nobody. This is the first video on Earth like it. You're the first person to see it. Absolutely guarantee you that fact. This discovery is mine. Copyright 2014. Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism, as found in the 3rd edition. I'm well into the 4th edition. There'll probably be 6 or 7 editions. I have a tremendous amount to add to the book. But blue shift, red shift, blue shift, red shift, blue shift, red shift. You see what I'm referring to? And along the dielectric inertial plane, you see the red, green, and blue. You see all patterns of light, and they'll all terminate right in the center. They start dipping in. This is where the notion by Leeds Scollin, who was wrong, he wrote a book on magnetism, is very childish and is very juvenile, but I mean, he didn't know. This is why some of these people said a magnet has 4 poles. They're actually referring to the dielectric inertial plane as being segmented out in 4 quadrants, either pole on the dielectric inertial plane. Actually, a magnet has no poles. It just has the inverse of counter space. The inverse of counter space, i.e. non-Euclidean geometry, well, it's what the idiots of quantum call zero-point energy, or what those idiots also call dark matter, is nothing other than unmanifest inertia. The loss of inertia can only be expressed in one fashion, and that's magnetism. That is what magnetism is. It is the reciprocating precessional. You know what precession is? Reciprocating, you know what that is? Not difficult, sounds difficult. Reciprocating precessional hyperboloid, which can only extrapolate itself out in a hypertrochoidal fashion. Now, you're the first person in the world to see this phase shift. Red shift, blue shift, red shift, blue shift. Doesn't matter how I turn it. These are all evenly spaced. Doesn't matter if I use white light LEDs. Doesn't matter if I crank it to... of course, I can't see in complete and total darkness here. Doesn't matter if I shift it to the red, the green, or the blue. Blue shift, red shift. It's still all green, but it is blue. It is red shifted over here. It is blue shifted over here. That's why it's so much brighter over here. Doesn't matter how I turn it. You see, I have shift right here. This is the phase disparity. It exists at a ratio of 1 to 5. My discovery. This is Tim van der Relly's invention. But I didn't find his invention or discover his invention until I was well into the 2nd edition of my book, Uncovering the Missing Secrets of Magnetism. My formula is proven out by many test media. There is a vortex that exists along either pole, quote unquote. We speak conventionally here as referring to a pole. Here's one of the poles of the magnet. There is a vortex that exists there. I have my own invention. It's a special ferrofluidic suspension, and I've got a video on it if you want to traipse back that shows the vortex. If you actually place a magnet underneath my special ferrofluid suspension, it will actually form a tornado-like vortex and spiral in towards the pole of the magnet. So, you're the first people to see this, and try finding any scientist to refute this, because they've never even seen this before, and they've got nothing to refute. And there is nothing to refute about electromagnetic retardation. It is a known entity. The only thing, however, it does refute is that the notion that space is warped and that relativity is supported. Remember, it is called a theory still for a reason. And even if I were not to exist, this theory is being disproven more and more and more and more every day. I'm about to show you on a very small scale, which no one has ever seen before in any video ever. No one's ever seen redshift at a level like this moving very slowly. You know, let's say 1 mile an hour. I'm going to show you redshift and blue shift. But I'm going to show you relative disparity. Now, as I've already talked about in my book, and I mentioned before, I place the magnet underneath the ferrocell. Let me turn the lights off so you can see better underneath the ferrocell. I place the magnet right here. I know simply by looking underneath this ferrocell, since the magnet is static and is static relative to the lights over here, but it doesn't matter how I orientate it. This side of the magnet is bluish in color. It's green, but it's bluish, and over here it's reddish. We have a phase disparity, and this is also proof of why my seed experiments work this way. We have EM retardation. That's technically what it's called, electromagnetic retardation. I know that this is the North Pole because it has a ratio of 1 to 5. We have compression here and rarefaction here. Compression, the blue end of the spectrum, is more bluish. It's greenish blue, but it's still blue. At a ratio of 5, 1.618, 033, etc., etc., and a ratio of 1 over here. Now this is static. I don't know if you know how an AC generator works, but it works, and this is Tesla's invention, of course, but an AC generator works exactly the same. Now this is the plane of inertia. By the way, this is one pole of the magnet, this is the other pole. But a magnet doesn't have poles, as I've explained many times. Mother Nature does not have poles. She has the inverse of counter space. The inverse of inertia is force and motion. These are force and motions. See, Mother Nature does not draw a line like us humans. She doesn't draw a line like here, here. Mother Nature only knows how to draw a line like this. Here, here, here. That is polarity. Polarity is only the inverse of inertia, the inverse of counter space, force and motion, the creation of space. Space is nothing. Space is literally the absence of inertia. It is literally the wake front as left behind from the release of inertia, as magnetism reciprocates, which is the dielectric field from one quote-unquote pole to the other. So here we're able to see the phase shift, the static phase shift, which I've already explained in the third edition of magnetism. How on earth could I show you that phase shift, the disparity of motion, is purely electrical, was technically magnetic and dielectric, but is purely electrical in nature? Is simply based upon phase disparity. Now, if this were an AC motor, I don't know if most of you know how an AC motor works, we'd actually have our copper windings around here. We'd have internal motor, which is hooked to a crankshaft. Let's say water's turning the crankshaft, and it's turning the magnet, and this magnet is turning. The only thing an AC motor is, and listen closely, is an inside-out magnet. We have the plane of inertia on the outside, and we have the magnetism on the inside. Obviously, Mother Nature does not work that way. This is how we generate electricity. The entire world generates electricity off the premise of Nikola Tesla's invention that such an AC generator, a power generator, is in its very simplistic essence a magnet turned inside out. A magnet, we have the plane of inertia at the very dead center. The opposite, they're the inverse of force and motion, centrifugal divergence. We have the plane of rest of inertia. If you're able to put two magnets together and place a Gauss meter at the center of those two magnets, it would register no magnetism. Well, that doesn't make any sense, but it's an absolute undeniable fact. The center of everything, there is not that which is opposite to the center. At the center of gravity, the center of the Earth, there's no gravity. At the center of a magnet, there's absolutely no magnetism. This is exactly what it is. Force and motion, inertia and acceleration. How does this explain redshift and blue shift? EM retardation, the disparity of motion. Here we have zero motion and we have a phase shift, a blue phase shift and a red shift, which exists at a ratio of 5:1 or 1:5, depending on how you look at it, which is actually an egg shape. It's a perfect egg shape. If you're able to cut an egg, dissect it in half, we'd have the pointy tip up here, which exists at a volume, a ratio of 1, and down here the larger, fatter section of the egg, which exists at a ratio of 5, so 5:1, which together is 5 squared, which is 2.1618, so on and so forth. So, how am I able to simulate on this tiny, tiny little scale, moving about 1 mile an hour, stellar redshift and blue shift? The only thing I have to shift is this magnet, relative to the lights here. Let's say I'm an observer on a planet over here, and this is a star. Let's say I'm another observer on the opposite end over here. Let's recreate redshift and blue shift. Remember now, this is red and this is blue. But how can I shift that? Relative motion to the disparity of the electricity, i.e. light, which is a coaxial circuit, transverse electrical magnetic, longitudinal dielectric. Let's show you phase shift. Now look closely and I'll explain it. You see how this is blue now? As it was approaching, it went to blue shift. If I move it away, let's just look at this one pole only. Let's ignore this pole over here, okay? You notice that this red shifted now? Let me move this closer to a person over here. Let's say there's a person on a little planet over here, and this is a star. Okay, now it's red shifted. Let's move this star closer to this person over here. You see how this blue shifted? Let's move it away and watch this blue, which is bluish green, but it's still blue shifted, turn to red. Red shift. Blue shift. We're only looking at this pole over here. A second. I think I had a little power outage there. There we go. Blue shift, red shift. Red shift, moving away from this relative point. Now let's take a look. Let me check my power connection here. Let's take a look at the other pole. Hold on a second. There we go. Sorry about that. Let's take a look at the other pole over here on the right side. Let's orientate my magnet exactly. Okay, let's wait for it to appear. There we go. Let's take only a look at this. Blue shift relative to this person over here. Let's say this point over here. Blue shift as it moves away relative to this point. we have redshift. You notice how it shifted to the red? Now watch it shift again. Remember, only looking at this pole on the right side of my finger. Okay? Redshift, blue shift. Redshift, blue shift. Inverse to the other pole. Look closely. Nothing has changed other than disparity of EM retardation. It has nothing to do with space. Has nothing to do with time. It is EM phase shift disparity, or EM retardation. This is also the differential that is programmed into every global positioning satellite relative to its motion. This has nothing to do with Einstein, has nothing to do with general relativity, and has nothing to do with quantum mechanics. The universe is purely dielectric and magnetic. If you want to think of it as electrical, that's fine. Electricity is phi times psi, Q and Planck of electrification. Electricity is a hybrid. That which we call gravity is nothing other than incoherent dielectric acceleration, or increasing inertia, centripetal convergence, or that which we call magnetic attraction. They're one and the exact same thing. So what you're looking at here is nothing to do with space or time. Everything in the universe is purely electrical. Space is not anything that acts on anything. Tesla said this. He said it many times. This is also why Tesla ever called Einstein a fuzzy-haired crackpot. For the reification of nothing, i.e. space, as that which acted upon things, which is the premise of GR and QM, general relativity and quantum mechanics. But the universe does not work that way. The universe is purely electrical, and electrical only. Magnetic, dielectric, centripetal convergence, centrifugal divergence, and here we have the magnet, which is the reciprocating precessional hyperboloid that defines the simplest nature of the entire universe, the plane of inertia, and we have the disparity of polarity, which exists at a phase shift of phi to 1, or phi a squared together, 2.618033, so on and so forth. But relative motion to a point has nothing to do with space or time. It is called electromagnetic retardation. And this is the exact same way. Instead of this motion, in an AC generator, what we're actually getting is this motion, where the magnet is turning and turning, and we have copper windings around here. The only difference between me showing you the phase shift this way, and how an AC motor works, which is like this, I can't actually make this thing spin and spin and spin, is we have the plane of inertia outside here, and we have the magnet on the inside. An AC motor, in its most simplex definition, is an inside-out magnet. And Mother Nature does not work that way. She doesn't like to work that way. But by turning this magnet relative to a plane of inertia, the thousands and thousands of copper windings that make up an AC motor. The magnet is spun via water, hydroelectric, nuclear, off of steam. It doesn't matter what turns this magnet inside the copper coil. It's creating a phase disparity, which equals E, electricity. All electricity in the entire world runs off the premise of Nikola Tesla's invention, which in its most simplest form, if Mother Nature was a chick and she were to look at the most simple thing that powers the entire world, an AC generator invented by Nikola Tesla, she would declare that is an inside-out magnet. Taken the plane of inertia, brought it out here, and placed the magnet right in the center, which is exactly how it works. But back to redshift and blue shift. I'm showing you redshift and blue shift at a rate of 1 mile an hour, which no one has ever seen before. Because the only way to show this is with my buddy's invention, the ferrocell. I predicted this too before I ever discovered the ferrocell existed. But this is the first time anybody on Earth has ever seen this. Ever. Period. No one's ever seen this before. Redshift and blue shift that we typically think of on the order of magnitudes of stars moving at endless millions and millions of miles a second can be replicated here in my hand, showing you that redshift and blue shift is phase disparity of relative induction. That seems like a mouthful, but it's really, really, really simple. We're talking about recreating this phase shift that exists on a magnet that I'm able to see at a ratio of phi to 1, and recreating that and shifting it at the basis of the magnet due to relative motion of the field perturbation, i.e. the light that is feeding it. You're seeing phase shift right here. You can see this turn from blue to red as I move it. and vice versa on the other side. Look, you are seeing phase shift. Doesn't matter how I turn it, it's going to be the same. And the only thing an AC generator is this spinning around inside the plane of inertia. But we're talking about redshift and blue shift here, and explaining it in very simple terms. There's someone else, a very, very, very intelligent man. I think he held 2 doctorate degrees. He never discovered this, but he simply said, in a very kind manner, that there's Dr. Oleg D. Jefemenko, that GR and QM was nonsense, except he said it in a very, very scientific way. Electromagnetic retardation, EM retardation, and theory of relativity. However, this book is not about supporting the theory of relativity, it's about destroying the theory of relativity. Everything that Einstein fed us was the reification that the universe is not electrical, but that space and time acted on things, warped things. This is not the case. The reason that light bent around the sun, as we observed in the famous experiment from decades ago, had nothing to do with curved space and time. That's an absurdity. That's like saying unicorns or leprechauns cause something to happen. It's an absurdity. It's an absurdity. What happened was the EM retardation of that light striking the edge of, let's say the Earth is over here, this is the sun, the light striking the edge of this point of dielectric acceleration, or what we call the gravitational acceleration of the sun, and is warping, bending the light. But it has nothing, this is simply an electrical phenomena. It has nothing to do with space and time. This book is so full of math it will make your head spin. Proof after proof after proof that relativity is absolute BS. 2 doctorate degrees. This guy wrote many books. I wished he were still alive. He did not make this discovery that I showed you over the past 10 minutes or so. But the premise for it is essentially the same. We're talking about the universe being purely electrical. Space and time are not things which act upon things. If you think they are, then you're of the same foolish mindset that leprechauns and unicorns and angels and fairies are influencing humanity. And of course I'm sure there's many idiots out there that believe that nonsense, but that's a point for another discussion, of course, isn't it? So you're the first person on Earth to see this. I showed you at a scale of 1 mile per hour or less redshift and blue shift using my buddy's invention, the ferrocell, and a simple cylindrical magnet. I showed it to you. There's no denying it. There's no refuting it. If you want to reproduce it yourself, go ahead and reproduce it yourself. But this simplex macro experiment, which I've done many times, but this is the first time I've ever shown it in a video, proves that general relativity and quantum mechanics notion that space and time are that which play a part and parcel in the math or the cosmic mechanics of redshift and blue shift and stellar and galactic movements is absolute BS. The universe and Mother Nature is electrical. It is only electrical. Space and time are not entities which do anything. I'll tell you what they are. They are measures and magnitudes. They are the slide rules which define the nature of existence and the motions between masses. They are nothing other than tape measures. And as we both know, tape measures do not build houses. Okay? That's all time and space are. They're measures and magnitudes of phenomena and their motion. It is how human stupidity and humankind have defined and reified the nature of existence and the motion of bodies. The ancient Greek Platonists knew this, and they wrote about this extensively. The ancient Indians knew this and wrote about this extensively. Plotinus knew it, Pythagoras knew it, Plato knew it, Demasius, Numenius, Sri Sankaracharya of Advaita Vedanta, Rigveda, Samaveda, Atharvaveda. All of these people knew the definition of space and time. They knew what it was and what it was not. Us, with our modern inventions and our technology, we think we know, but we don't know. Thanks to the foolishness and the insanity of Albert Einstein and the quacks that have fallen into the cult, the religion of particle physics is strictly ancient Greek atomism that's rehashed. We have a false picture of the universe. I can tell you right now that Mother Nature is not a cross-eyed chick with a calculator, a slide rule, glasses. She's like a naked, hairy armpit chick wearing like a hemp loincloth, frolicking with dirty feet through the woods. Cosmic mechanics do not work according to the premise and the insanities, the rabid mental machinations and pathetic absurdities of quantum mechanics and general relativity. Math is the science of humans counting and measuring things, okay? Mother Nature does not do math. She does not have a slide rule or a calculator. Everything in the universe is force and motion and inertia and acceleration, centrifugal divergence, centripetal convergence, relative motion. There's not a single straight line in the universe. Everything is curvilinear. Not a single straight line in the universe. This is the curvilinear hypertrochoid that you see underneath the ferrocell. Magnetism in its true and naked form. No one has ever seen magnetism. I predicted this formation perfectly before I ever even discovered this device existed. And I was proven right by this device. So thanks to my buddy for inventing it. Thanks for watching. Catch you later.
However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120. That is 1 with 120 zeros after it.
With 59 possible redshift mechanisms.
Sort of like doing scientific research by press releases in an attempt to defend, as a sort of a last resort, a dying paradigm in physics.
I don't know what more one can do than the data are there, they've been got, we have to make sense of it.
I think in one sense they think it's bad to, quote, confuse, unquote, the public. Because if you believe in the standard paradigm with all your heart, you know it can't be real. I know it can't be real. If I try to be at all rational within the context of the current Big Bang ideology.
The universe is expanding.
Well, who says it's not?
Everyone who emails me, everything like this, I get emails and letters and things like this.
59.
10 to the 120.
And therefore it should be totally in the background of this active spiral. But it's almost in front of the nuclear bulge of this spiral galaxy.
I don't know if the ship can take us. What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken? Prepare ship! Prepare ship for ludicrous speed. Fasten all seatbelts. Seal all entrances and exits. Close all shops in the mall. Cancel the three-ring circus. Secure all animals in the zoo. Give me that, you petty excuse for an officer. Now hear this. Ludicrous speed. Sir, hadn't you better buckle up? Buckle this. Ludicrous speed. Go!
And the light just got tired coming from these other galaxies and so forth.
Light gets tired?
There's literally...
Matter of fact, the telescope on Sophia is identical to Hubble.
Literally...
Blue shift, red shift. Doesn't matter how I turn it. Blue shift, red shift. Blue shift, red shift.